Hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing well.
Doing fantastic.
I'm glad to hear it. Now, Sam, last week, I did 3 economic presentations in person. And in June, I guess alone, June of 2021, I've done 4. And these are the first 4 I've done really since the pandemic really kind of started. You know, people are finally feeling safe getting back in person and holding events and what have you. And, we did a bunch of Zoom presentations over the last 12 months, but these were in person. It was a lot of fun, point me to the podium and I'm okay, as you well know. However, one of the questions I got at one of the presentations I made during the Q&A, of course, kind of got me to thinking. And I think I might have surprised the person with my answer, and this is unscripted here today. But Sam, the question was, because I'd mentioned my daughter Annie, who had just graduated from college. I had been mentioning her about something. I'm not going to go into that. But the question was, John, do you think your daughter's generation will be better off than your generation? After all, that has always been sort of the American dream, the American way of life, that each generation is better off than the one previous. Now, I've got my feelings on it, but understanding that you and my daughter are both in the same generation, Sam, what a aging Gen Xer has to say about it might not be all that important. I'm very curious to find out what someone in your generation feels about the future. Sam, do you think your generation is going to be better off than your parents' generation?
Yeah, well, real quick, I'll give it the caveat of when we decided to talk about this in this episode, we intentionally didn't tell each other our opinions of this going into it, so that this would be a pretty open and hopefully lively debate, and maybe one of the few things we disagree on. But I would say a resounding yes, that things are going to be better for our generation. Things are getting better going forward. And there is continuously more reason to continuously be more optimistic about the future. And to me, there's not much of a debate for it.
Well, and that ends this week's Trading Perspectives because, Sam, I feel the exact same way. I really did not know what your response was going to be. I really kind of thought maybe it would be in the negative. And I answered the person last week who asked me, a gentleman by the name of Mark. And I told him, no, I said, listen, I think my daughter's generation and my grandchildren's generation, my great-grandchildren's generation should be better off than we are if we don't do anything stupid. I mean, I mentioned how the cartoon character Pogo was famous for saying, we have met the enemy and he is us. And that's kind of the way it really kind of is. We stand in the way of our own happiness and advancement in a lot of ways. And Sam, I'm going to go off on a diatribe right now, as I am wont to do and prone to do, and talk about. And I asked the question in this group and trying to talk about just why generations, are generally better off, moving forward. And I asked the group, who was the world's leading superpower in 1900? And they said, I'm kind of looked at me kind of like cross-eyed, like, well, what's he getting at? And I said, it's probably arguably
Great Britain.
British Empire. Yeah, the British Empire. And I said, the British Empire had an absolutely horrific 20th century, absolutely horrible. So much so that here we are 121 years later since 1900. And is the British Empire, or is the United Kingdom, still the world's dominant superpower? Or still
not even close.
Not even close. Is the pound sterling the primary reserve currency or currency of international business? No. It's does Britain still have mastery of the seas? And the answer to all this is no. So on a relative basis, over the last 12 decades, Britain has really suffered mightily. However, I would caution, before we say all things is doom and gloom, is the average life expectancy in the United Kingdom higher now or back in 1900?
Obviously now.
Is the literacy rate in the United Kingdom higher now or in 1900? Access to goods and services higher now or in 1900? Access to healthcare higher now or in 1900? Just about every measure of living standards in the United States much higher now than it was in 1900, even as Britain has seen its place amongst the status of great powers diminish. And so it's I kind of feel the same way about your generation, the generations that follow, you should have greater access to goods and services than we currently have. You should lead a healthier lifestyle, and you should be able to live longer than my generation did. By all these measures and living standards and whatnot, you should have a much better future than what I had growing up. It doesn't mean the United States is always going to be the world's hegemon or the world's sole superpower. China might take that over, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things are worse off for the average American. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, and there's a guy named Morgan Housel who has a financial blog, and he's a financial writer that I really enjoy. And he wrote about this recently, talking about how a lot of people, it seems like, now kind of yearn for the feeling that we had in I'd say the 1950s. So he talks about it, where the husband works, the wife stays at home, you have 3 kids and a dog and a nice car, and everyone seems happy. But what he points out is that our wealth grew, but our expectations grew more, which to me seems really kind of where the issue is. Because, I mean, the median hourly wage adjusted for inflation is 50% higher today than it was in 1955. Half of Americans didn't have health insurance in 1950s, and 2/3 lacked surgical insurance. It's a big reason why over 4% of Americans didn't see their 5th birthday, and now it's way less than 1%. I mean, retirement used to not even really be a thing. 47% of men over the age of 65 used to continuously be working, and now that number's down to around 23%. I mean, there's data that backs up that things are continuously getting better. I mean, food consumed 1/3 of an average household's budget in the 50s, and now it's 12%. And workplace deaths were 3 times higher than they are now. And that's not even discussing the technology that's being built right now and what they're looking towards in the future. I mean, SpaceX putting satellites all across the entire Earth to develop an internet network that services everybody. They're developing technology to be implanted in people's brains to allow paralyzed people to walk again. I mean, the technology that is coming out now is astounding, and it's hard to not be bullish on the future with all this data and all this technology that's coming out going forward. I mean, even the vaccines that we had last year. I mean, Moderna developed their vaccine in less than a week, and then it took a year to test it and get it approved. But that would have been unfathomable even 10 years ago, 15, 20, let alone in the 50s and before. It's hard not to be excited about where things are going, where healthcare is going, where technology is going, where the economy is going. Things keep getting better. I mean, last year we had the worst recession in over a decade, and there was like over $13 trillion of wealth gained in this country. So it's hard not to be excited.
Well, Sam, you mentioned the 1950s, and I guess that's really kind of the start of what historians have called the Pax Americana. And you also have to remember, in the 1950s, we still had institutionalized segregation, around much of the country. And so we truly weren't living up to anywhere close to American ideals. So I did also mention in my presentation, I don't go around quoting this gentleman all that often, but I did. But the singer Billy Joel had a song. I forget the name of the song right off the top of my head, but I remember the quote: "The good old days weren't all so good, and tomorrow's not as bad as it seems." And I could sit there and say that's very much the truth. When people wax nostalgic about the past, it's kind of like with misty eyes, they look back on it. However, when you ask people to give up what the comforts that they have now, no one wants to go back. I mean, I wish America, blah, blah, blah. Okay, do you want to go back to the 1950s? You don't want to have ESPN? You don't want to have your cholesterol medication. You don't want to have buffalo wings. All this stuff that has advanced in the United States, even as we have said, this time is much different and what have you. Now, Sam, with that being said, I will tell you one thing has not gotten better, and that is the music. Your thoughts on that?
I'm not much of a 70s and 80s music fan for the most part, so I'll probably disagree on that one.
Yes, the 1970s was more than just disco, my friend.
I guess so, but still not my.
So I would say that's really about the only thing. But it's every generation has a tendency to believe that the generation that comes after it is more worthless and lazy and whatnot. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. So I think the future is very bright for you all. You mentioned all the technological advancements. I did mention also in the presentation, as I might have told you before as well. My father's father was born in 1891. 19th century. So this is a gentleman that I knew. Obviously, I'm named after him. And, he was 12 when the Wright brothers left the ground. 12.
Yep.
And think about the recent missions to Mars. Think about everything that you just mentioned with SpaceX. If they can ever get the Webb telescope off the ground and out into space, think how cool that's going to be with what it's going to be able to see back to the beginning of time. That's what they're telling us. And, my father's father was 12 before the first manned flight. And think about all the dislocations we've had in American society over the last 120 years. I mean, 2 world wars, a Great Depression, a Great Recession, all the civil strife in the 1960s, all of that bad stuff, all these times when we're not coming out of it. This time is different. American has fallen, and it's going to be much worse moving forward. And yet we find ourselves even further ahead as time goes on. So I guess we're kind of sharing the same ideas, Sam, that, your generation is going to be better off. What gives you pause or cause for concern about the future? Anything that could change our prediction here? Your thoughts?
What gives me concern, I don't know if it gives me enough concern to be less excited about the future, but that's just the societal strife that we're in that seemingly has no end in sight. Things continue to get more divisive, and I'm not saying they won't change at some point, but as of right now, there's no end in sight for the strife and the division that we're having. And maybe it doesn't change. Maybe this being a new social media age and where everyone can voice their opinion in 2 seconds, and the vocal minority is who is governed towards, it seems like at times. Maybe it is here to stay. And that is the thing that concerns me going forward, is the division and really the impact that social media has on our society. I think it's a net negative right now. I mean, I get there's positives to social media, and there's all these anecdotal stories of good things that have happened from it. But it seems to me that the extremism on both sides that we have and the hive mentality that we have is all due to social media. And that is what gives me concern. That and the fact that the founders of some of these social media companies don't even allow their children on it, which seems highly concerning to me, that the founder of a product won't even allow their own family, the people they love most, to use it. So that is my single biggest concern going forward, and that it may be different, and that this may not change, and it may be here forever.
Sam, you bring up a very interesting observation, and it's kind of curious, I think, in my estimation, that here you are, a member of Gen Z, probably the most social media connected generation ever, most adapted technology, or should be. And here you're saying the biggest threat is social media due to its divisiveness. And, I feel the same way. So we're not trading perspectives there, so much so that I got rid of my Twitter account because I found myself just kind of reading it and getting kind of angry. And so I would say that social media can be good, but it really does cause divisions in the country, or makes those divisions that much wider. Because as you and I've talked, in the past, you used to have to go to some level of work or effort in order to have a public opinion, and you had to be pretty transparent about it. If you wanted to get a letter to the editor in the local newspaper, you had to put your name and address down and all that stuff. Now you can create a fake name, blast some crazy stuff out there just to troll people, and it has a negative impact.
Yep.
So is there any sort of reining in of social media that people can do, or can people of your generation simply say enough is enough and quit using it in order to improve the prospects of the future? Your thoughts?
I don't think people are going to give it up, because I think it hits on something very specific in our brain. I mean, the dopamine levels around likes that people get and just, interactions, it causes dopamine hits similar to using drugs. It's not something that's going to go away. And I think that the change we're going to see is, take what Apple's done, for example. They've added showing screen time as an option on your phone. So it'll calculate your screen time and what it's shown on each individual app, what each type of app, whether it's social media, news, whatever, it'll break those down. And you can even set limits on it. And I've anecdotally seen people kind of gasp at their social media use once that has become aware, because it's so mindless most of the time that people don't realize it. I mean, people may think they've been on it for an hour the whole day, and it's been 5-6 hours. I mean, it really is shocking how off people are, me included, with the time that they've spent on social media applications. And so I think that is a small glimmer of hope in companies like Apple, and not the social media companies themselves giving consumers a way to kind of limit it, because I don't think Instagram, Facebook, Twitter are going to tell their users to stop signing on. It's going to have to come from somebody who can benefit from it.
And
they won't. So
interestingly enough, this virtuous behavior out of Apple, the CEO of that company, Tim Cook, where did he go to undergraduate, Sam?
The wonderful Auburn University.
I send checks down there now. So Sam, we're going to kind of take this full circle here. I think we're both very much in agreement that the future looks pretty good. But we, as I kind of started off with, we kind of stand in our own way in terms of making it happen and making it thus. And kind of like what that cartoon character Pogo said back then, I've met the enemy and he is us. I think what you're saying is that exact same thing, whether you meant to or not, that we are standing in our own way, that if we can work together, there's no reason why the future can't be much brighter. But if we continue to fight one another, all bets are off. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
I think that hits the nail on the head.
All right. Well, gosh, I mean, one of these days we're going to trade perspectives, because that is the name of the podcast. However, I think you'd really kind of have to have a little bit of a screw loose to not maybe see where we're coming from, or at least, if not agree wholeheartedly with what we've talked about today. There's no reason why the future can't be better, if only we allow it to be so. So with that, we always love to hear from you all. So if you have any comments or questions, by all means, please drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakwood.com. As always, we want to hear from you. So, but if you also want to read more or hear more of how we think and what we do, by all means, go to oakwood.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of good information. Sam, anything else that you want to talk about, the great future that you have in store for yourself?
That's all I got. I'm excited.
All right. That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.